Well, we're in Eugene and we're on the University of Oregon campus. So that's why Jen and I are at Lillis on campus. Some of you may be familiar with this classroom and building. Continue to just type in where you're from or where you're logging in from today if you can throughout the conversation. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to just first of all, thank you all for joining us this evening, and maybe you're in different time zones, so potentially afternoon or even later evening. And I wanted to acknowledge the amazing women who are also University of Oregon graduates who we will be speaking with tonight. My name is Caitlin Elwood, and I am the Senior Associate Director of Strategic Engagement in the Advancement Office at University of Oregon. I'm thrilled that we have Paisley and Anisha with us today, as well as Jennifer, who are here to share their insights, perspectives, and wisdom about being a woman in business. I first want to introduce Jen, who's sitting beside me. So I'm going to be sort of reading only so that I don't miss anything from her career, because I already, a little teaser, she's been in it for 30 years, and that's amazing to me. So I would like to kick us off by introducing Jen Wielander. Jen is an accounting instructor at the University of Oregon Lundquist College of Business and a capstone advisor for the college's Oregon Executive MBA program. Her career spans 30 years with experience in audit, finance, and accounting roles in various organizations, including KPMG, a transportation technology company, a real estate developer, and St. Charles Health System, where she served as chief financial officer. Jen is an active licensed CPA and holds a bachelor's degree in accounting and a master's degree in business administration from the University of Oregon. Woohoo! So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to you, kind of literally, and have the conversation get started. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Caitlin. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I'm super honored to get to spend time with these two amazing women this evening and ask them some questions, and we'll all get to learn from their experiences. So who better to introduce themselves than them themselves? So I'm going to start with Paisley. So Paisley, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about your career, the roles you've had, and also a fun fact about you before we get rolling.
Thanks, Jen. Well, first and foremost, I'll say I graduated from Oregon in 1996. So it's been a hot minute since I've been back to Eugene. Since that time, I had a few roles before I started in tech, but I'm going to focus primarily on my experience in tech marketing. I've been in B2B enterprise tech marketing for 23 years. I've had roles across marketing, the likes of SAP, Salesforce, Google, and more recently LinkedIn, where I'm at right now. And I've kind of run the gamut of marketing disciplines. I've done everything from ABM to strategic events to integrated campaigns, industry marketing, and then some more, which I won't go into massive detail. It's been a very long career. And right now I'm leading a team I'm actually leading 3 teams, one focused on North America field marketing, another on strategic accounts, and one that looks at how we monetize content at LinkedIn. And I know that you want us to give a fun fact. And my fun fact is, I'm really into mountaineering. I'm not quite sure. I've been obsessed with Everest my entire life ever since I was a kid. And I have not done Everest because it actually petrifies me, but I did climb Mount Kilimanjaro a few years ago, which was a feat in itself and really, really fun. So that is me. And thank you for having me here today.
Excellent. What an amazing fun fact. I'm jealous. That's hats off. So Anisha, that's what you have to now compete with.
Sorry,
to follow, right?
Right. You can do it though. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Anisha Weber, and I graduated in 1990. And I do have I love that Paisley works at LinkedIn, because I was gonna say, you can just look at my LinkedIn and you'll get a whole bunch of different stages through my career. But I have been in tech for a very long time, first with the Big Six in consulting, and then for the last 23 years in tech and business consulting. And I would say most recently, I was the COO at Primitive Logic in San Francisco before we were acquired by Logic 2020 out of Seattle. And after 26 years in that space, I am finally taking a break from that world and giving myself grace of space to figure out if I want to pivot into something brand new. And I would say, fun fact, I cannot top or summit what Pagely gave. But I did leverage the fact that my dad is from Switzerland and I have a Swiss passport. So after skiing for the Ducks, I went over to Switzerland and continued skiing for another season while working there.
Well, excellent. What great backgrounds. I'm really excited to hear more about your experiences. So we're just going to jump right into the questions, and I'm going to bounce between the two of you, and we'll manage the Q&A as well. So we'll hopefully have time to answer any questions that everyone has. All right, Pagely, I'm going to go to you first. So can you tell us, what has leadership meant to you, both in terms of watching others and developing yourself? And how's your perspective changed some over time?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a big one for me. So I've taken a ton of inspiration from many of my past leaders. And I think as I reflect on it, what's really stood out to me across all of them is their ability to lead with authenticity, without ego, which has been massively appreciated, and with the understanding that when you become a leader, you really are taking other people's careers in your own hands. And I actually had one leader who I adore, and I actually followed her to 2 other companies. But her motto was that as a leader, she was there to make others great. And reporting to her made me feel incredibly safe. And it made me feel like my career was in good hands with this person because, you know, she didn't just talk the talk, she actually walked the walk with that. And for me, when I think about, you know, how I am as a leader, I really try and emulate that because I found it so incredibly inspiring, not just for as somebody that worked for her, but also just as a leader in general. And so it is something I've tried to do with the teams that I've had the privilege of leading. So with that, I don't necessarily think my perspective has changed. I think I've evolved as a leader. I think that I've grown as a leader, and that has been through really learning from other leaders, but more importantly, from my teams. I'm a leader that appreciates feedback. I encourage feedback. And with that, I get that always and often. In fact, I got a heavy dose of it today. And I think that can be hard at times. You know, you really have to, again, check your ego at the door, but it's something that I consider a gift, and it's something that I really appreciate. And, you know, for me, I really try to receive that openly and try as best as possible to act on it and try and make a difference from what I'm hearing from my team. And so for that, I think I'll always be growing and learning as a leader, just as I will as a marketer and a person in general, because I don't know it all. I never will. And part of the journey is just to continue to evolve as we go.
Great. Thank you for those insights. Anisha, so I know when I started my career, it took me a while to figure out who Jen was in a corporate and a business setting. So can you tell us a little bit, how did you find your voice at the table as your career evolved?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question as people are finding their voices more and more. And I love that you said that, like, how did you find Jen? And although I studied rhetoric communication at the university, I did start building what I would say more of confidence in what I had to say during my MBA, and then also continued learning that, kind of extending my voice during my early career in tech, especially while surrounded by many who would have louder or longer voices. And I was very fortunate to have strong allies supporting me. And I think, you know, that's something that we might keep coming back at, you know, whether it's mentors or allies or people that we saw as strong leaders around us. And through years of experience and watching those great examples, I think I found a clear voice in leading with empathy and facilitation. And I know that wasn't overly popular back in the 90s when I was starting. And it has become more and more something that we respect and embrace. and also ensuring that others around the table shared their thoughts, and that's including all people who may be quieter or more reticent, didn't have to be only women in tech. And when I know I shared this earlier when we all chatted, one of the tips that I started using in recent years, just to engage everybody in a particular meeting, and so that can be either virtual or in person, is starting the session with a round robin check-in where each person shares something. So you can ask them, you know, what did you do this past weekend? Or what's your favorite thing in the spring? Anything that you want. It can even be a check-in on rating themselves on a scale. And essentially by opening up their voice at the start of the meeting, it psychologically connects them to the session, to the group that is sitting around them, and then also engages their brains in a safe space and discussion so that everybody is a participant rather than just joining and observing the group. So that's been really helpful. And I think continuing to support different voices around the table is important.
Excellent. Such great responses to both questions so far. I probably won't work out, but I'd like to come work for you guys. So if you have an opening for an accountant, I suppose maybe there's
anytime, Jen, anytime.
So I'll toss this to either one of you, and hopefully both can share some perspectives. So resiliency is a trait that we have and we develop, and it's kind of a gritty one, right? So how have you shown resiliency in your career? And is there a specific time or event that really stands out where you had to dig deep to overcome what was occurring?
You want to go, Paisley?
Oh, thank you, Anisha.
I can follow on your heels.
More so than a specific instance, I think being in tech for 23 years has been a constant act of resilience. And I don't say that lightly. And I think couple that with being a woman in tech for that long, you kind of feel a little bulletproof at times because of everything that we've had to go through. And like, I'll call out a few things. This is not going to be a surprise to anybody, but I've definitely been passed over for promotion. I've definitely had my work credited to other people. I have definitely been silenced in my career, and, you know, basically having my voice taken away many a time. And I think that through all of these different experiences, you either can give up or you can continue on. And, you know, for me, I think the biggest learning that I've kind of taken away from all of this stuff that we've had to go through as a woman in tech is it's taught me not to back down, and it's taught me to continue fighting for what I deserve. And those are two things that I am very appreciative of as learnings coming out of this. Now, do I wish it had been such a difficult road at times? No. But I am very grateful for what I gleaned out of that. And obviously it wasn't all tough. I'm still here in this industry and still, you know, realizing a really nice career in this industry, but it wasn't the easiest path to follow. So I think resiliency is something that isn't, you know, limited to one occurrence. I think it's actually for many of us across our entire careers that we're dealing with it and building it. And the other thing I'll say is that, you know, when I think about this, I am very conscious that I am standing on the shoulders of women that went through much, much more trying times than I have in my career. And the same will be true of future generations, especially as I think about the three of us chatting in this room, and also of the many other women leaders out there. And so the only thing I can say is that you will build resilience. It is an important thing to build. Resilience and grit definitely go together. And I only hope that we can learn from each other's journeys and continue to evolve through this, because I do believe that that's helped shape us become the leaders that we are today.
Ooh, good answer.
Thanks, Anisha.
And, well, and I think just to piggyback some of that and what you said, and especially just over time, how it just keeps evolving. I think the pandemic really highlighted resiliency in many of us in pivoting to new ways of working and embracing those changes. And I was thinking, when you shared this question of resiliency and grit, and building it, I feel, is a way of navigating an interesting career. So I can think of a number of times where difficult clients tried to throw some of our consultants under the bus as scapegoats, as happens often. And when they themselves were struggling with particular issues. And so I worked really hard to understand their perspective, because, immediately you just want to become mama bear and defend your team. But instead, make sure I didn't put them on the defensive and just understand where they were coming from, build a bridge or a relationship with them, and then collaborate on resolving the issues, focusing on the issues and not the people and not the team. And while in parallel protecting my team. So it just built a lot of an armor against, feeling insulted by how we were all being treated. And then also just being able to take that humble stance, but at the same time, know your worth and your value, and then push your ego to the side, supporting the client, and then understanding that, they're human, and whatever it is that they're struggling with, you can work on it together with them, and just helping bring the discussion back to common ground. So those were just some things that crossed my mind around resiliency and just making sure that you're standing alongside and supporting.
Excellent. I love, you've mentioned, humble and setting your ego aside. And I too have had many of those experiences. If I could humbly go in and seek to understand, I felt I could overcome most challenges. Most, not all, but most. All right. So Pagely, there's kind of a buzzword out there, how do you balance work and life, right? It's a thing that we talk about. So what does that look like for you over the years?
It's been interesting. It's a journey. I'll put it that way. So one funny thing is, probably mid-career, my big question when I was interviewing at a company was always asking them, tell me your philosophy on work-life balance. And honestly, everyone answered the same way. They would tell me that they had these perks, they had these holidays, these days were off, they encourage people to give time or to take time to give back. They might even have a masseuse on site. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're going to take care of me. This is wonderful. No, none of that matters unless you make it happen for yourself. And to me, this is all about boundaries, right? And in order to really realize that balance between work and life, it's about implementing really strong boundaries and make sure that you're claiming that time for yourself, because here's a newsflash that your company isn't going to do it for you. Your company actually wants you to work the 13-hour days for the most part. And I'm not saying this is not a blanket statement, but it can be true. So it's really up for the individual to set what this means for them. And for me, myself, it's been a bit of a rocky path. I am definitely a self-proclaimed workaholic, and it's been hard to take that time and take that space for myself. And it's been a real discipline and an active practice that I'm constantly engaging in. And for the first time this year, I actually created an OKR specific to wellness. And for those of you who don't know what an OKR is, and it's objectives and key results, and it's essentially a prioritization strategy as you think quarter over quarter. But that OKR was something I implemented and made my team do it too, so that we could start normalizing this and formalizing this behavior. And my OKR is that I'll take 2 early morning meetings a week. And the days that I do have meetings at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., I stop at 5. And then when I shut down, I shut down. And that means I will not look at email. I will not do email at night. I will not answer a ping that comes in at 8 p.m. That's my time for my family, my friends, and my puppy. So that's how it's starting to evolve for me. But, it's not perfect by any means. And I still think it's a practice that I'm always gonna stay dedicated to. And I'll end this with, as I think about this as a leader, I think this is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to model this behavior, because your team is going to emulate what you do. And so if you're working around the clock, guess what? They're going to work around the clock, or they're going to feel like they have to work around the clock. And what that's going to do is cause massive burnout, and not just for yourself, but for your organization as a whole.
Excellent. Very well said. Lots of good insights in there. And I unfortunately would admit I modeled a lot of bad behavior in that space over the years. I've got a little bit better, so I appreciate you calling that out. Anisha, so you're both in tech, right? And in any role, really, technical expertise in our career is generally highly valued. So can you share how soft skills, the listening, empathy, kindness, how did those play a role in your career? And how do you feel that they're evaluated by corporate America that we all work for?
I wish more, but yeah, no, thinking back to how I learned best, either with soccer coaches or professors, it was when they joined us on the run, or even just the educational journey, that I grew the most. And I'm sure we've all worked with many leaders who like to dictate their positions and opinions. And I saw that they got just average productivity from their teams. I think, we've probably all been in those roles. And I found that those leaders who actually listened to their people, joined them in the trenches, cared about their career growth, accelerated productivity, and then had much more buy-in from the teams, they're the ones who were the most effective. So, like I said, productivity went up, the teams got more bought in, they felt that, they were being joined together in this same journey as opposed to getting the orders. And, the little bit of a spin-off of that, because I think, talking about skills and then how we're being evaluated, or, whether it's technical expertise or the different areas where our performance is being evaluated, it feels as if there's still so many archaic performance review processes that evaluate just straight output, and then they don't capture the many forms of EQ that great leaders or even people moving up through the organization display. And I believe that we can all point to our favorite bosses and teammates, and many of us are not going to say that, hey, they were such a great developer and produced all this great code. We might, but for the most part, you tend to lean towards those that you feel are listening and coaching and wanting you to grow and keep learning. And I'm hoping that just, especially with all the things that I'm reading now coming out of Harvard Business Review and elsewhere, it just feels as if there is a movement towards understanding EQ and leadership and true listening, coaching, kindness, empathy, all those words that you mentioned.
Excellent. Well, I certainly hope so, because they are really so important to what we experience and our resiliency. They help with that. Yeah. Well, I'm going to switch topics a little bit and talk more directly about your career path. So, Nisha, I'm going to stay with you. And I heard you say once that a career is a marathon, not a sprint. So can you share more about that? Like, what does that mean, and how has it influenced your choices?
Yeah, I've been reading more and more articles. As I said, just things like keeping the long game in mind. I think that's what kind of a recent buzzword, or 2 words. And one of the articles that I think you and I were chatting about is that one coming out of Harvard Business Review, and it talked about thinking in waves, which is changing up your work strategies and then also running our own race, which just really gives ourselves grace to be on our own timeline. And then also understanding conditions for growth. So that's taking breaks, staying curious. There's one of the words that I absolutely love, curious. Everybody just put that in the back of your brains and keep staying curious. And then, as many of you have been working since those early grade school days of babysitting, those high school jobs of Baskin Robbins, and building my career, which often felt like a continual ladder, just going upwards, no stopping. It's just you feel that you have to power through. And only recently, I started thinking about taking my foot off the pedal and really truly assessing if what I'm doing is fulfilling And then if there's something totally different for the next chapter, moving away from tech, from consulting, from the space that I've been in for so long. And I think here's a little fun thing that I'll probably get a smile from Caitlin on. I'm currently taking the Career Design Fellowship course that I learned about through the University Alumni Association. And I wish that everybody could go through this process every 10 years or so. It uses, the people in my cohort are from all different ages and different times of graduating. So it's not as if it's just all of us in our 50s or everybody in their 30s. Instead, we're a nice mix. And it uses the design thinking phases of reflection, definition, testing, evaluation, and you apply that against your own career trajectory. And then it really makes you think about the strengths that you're bringing to bear, the skill sets, what are some limiting beliefs, and then helps think through what is it that your cohort or even your colleagues or peers recommend would be a good career for you. It just makes you reflect on that. And for me, I feel in these many different years of having different roles, whether that was working in the Rothschild Bank in Switzerland, or working at Accenture in the early days, I've always carved out the role that best aligns with my strengths within that job, and then focused on building the team and culture around me. So I know that I was in it for the marathon, and remembering that it's more about the journey and not the destination. Not to use a cliche, but it definitely, I feel your career should be more in that realm, and not focusing on only a particular destination or a particular milestone.
Excellent. Yes, I, as you know, am in the fortunate place. I took my foot totally off the gas pedal, and now I'm in this lovely space where I get to teach. And I wish I would have taken moments in my career to step back and think about my passions and where my strengths would be best utilized. So hopefully I'm in a good space now doing that. So Paisley, back to you. We often hear how young professionals, and probably all professionals, but certainly young professionals, need to advocate for themselves. And I know I found that as a really difficult thing to do. So can you share, how have you tackled that advocacy for yourself through different stages in your career?
Yeah, I wish I had been a much better advocate in my early career. I don't think advocacy at that time was even something that people talked about, to be honest. It was confused with bragging, or confused with, being too boastful, to be honest. And personally now, as I think about advocacy, I think advocating for yourself and for others, by the way, I'm going to throw that in there because I think that's just as important, is one of the most important things somebody can learn today to grow their career. And I don't say that lightly. And I also say learn very intentionally, because I don't think this is something that comes naturally for most people, especially for women. A lot of us have been told that humility is sort of a positive trait and the one that we should most likely embody. And I love a good humble person. I think humility is great, but humility is not going to get you promoted at the end of the day. And that's been a hard lesson that I've learned personally. It's also something that I've been noticing in my team as I hear them talk about themselves or not talk about themselves. And so I just actually had my whole team do this training. It's one hosted by Google. It's called I Am Remarkable, and it's a phenomenal training. It's all about advocacy. And part of the exercise in this training was to write sentences that straddle both your personal and professional life. And those sentences begin with, I am remarkable because ... And we each had 7 minutes to complete it. And I was mind blown. I had 7 minutes. I had 4 sentences, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I am one of these people that doesn't know how to do this well. And so I do think it is one of those things that will continue to evolve. And it's something that we have to continue to practice. But I had one brave soul in my team who offered to share her sentence. And, you know, it was fairly generic. That's what she was comfortable sharing. And the instructor stopped her and she said, you know, what you just said is not going to get you heard. And by the way, talking about facts is not bragging. And she had her try it again. But what she said in that second part, that if it's based on facts, it's not bragging, really resonated with me. And it kind of shifted my whole perception around how we talk about our accomplishments. And so in general, I think this is just something that we all need to get more comfortable with. You know, I practice this in certain instances. I practice this in my mid and annual year reviews, and obviously when I'm in a job interview, but that's not enough. You know, I think it needs to become something that we do as part of just like the rhythm of how we're communicating, especially upwards to leadership, so that they recognize our accomplishments as much as we do, and that there's visibility across those. And I think the more you talk about this and tell yourself this narrative, I also think the more confidence it instills in somebody, and it is going to make this advocacy for self that much easier.
And rather than bragging, it's kind of that pride, right?
It's all about pride. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm going to toss this to either one of you or both. So change is constant, right? It's happening every day all around us. What tactics have you used to leverage change to your advantage in advancing your career?
I can go, Anisha, and then fill in the blanks.
I know, right? Change
Change has been an always on for like 23 years. I think we talked about this a little bit before, but my first book I got when I was at Cisco was a book called Who Moved My Cheese? They actually gave me that book 4 times. I don't know if that was a hint or if it was just like something across the org, but the book is about these mice that live in a maze and they lose their cheese and they're just like thrown just out of their universe, just, oh my God, what am I going to do? But the whole premise of the story is to stay agile and to really embrace that knowledge that change is a constant and to be ready for it. And so I think it helps to embrace a growth mindset when you're ready to tackle the unknown. But I think the biggest moment of change I had where, I mean, the cheese book really did not help me in this, to be honest with you, but was leading a team through the pandemic. That was hard. That was change management at its most difficult. And not only was there a shift in how we worked, you know, everything became remote, everything became that much difficult. It was a shift in how we were living. And so there was this like combination of forces that was just really difficult to navigate at the time. We had massive budget cuts across marketing, but our sales team never like reduce their targets. So we still had the same amount of work to do, but with no money. And so we had to get really, really creative about how we were thinking about marketing and how we were going to actually address this problem. And I felt like I was a captain, not of a ship, of a really very like old dinghy floating out in this enormous storm. And all I could think about was I have to stay calm in order for my team to keep calm, because I think a lot about the shadows that we cast and, you know, what that might do to other people based on what shadow you are casting. And so it wasn't my job to make them more worried or concerned. It was my job to make them feel supported and to rally them behind this strategy. So we leaned on a very scrappy approach. We got creative. We had fun too, which was a beautiful part of it. But we did have to rethink our entire strategy and quickly. And looking back on those days, while it was tough as all get out, I mean, it was very tough. I think that there was a lot of goodness that came out of that. And this might be my PTSD talking right now, but from then on out, whenever I do planning exercises with my team, I take learnings from that massive change that had to happen. And we don't plan for the fiscal, we plan for the half, because we want to stay agile, not knowing what will happen or what could come next. And the other thing I do is I always ask for a plan B. So any of those out there that are thinking about working for me eventually, like these are things that are requirements that I do. But, I think it's important because no one ever expected something like COVID to rock our worlds the way that it did. And it did. And we had to respond to it. So that's my philosophy on change.
All right, Anisha, what about you?
Yeah, no, and I love some of the words that Pagely touched on. I mean, I think there was the growth mindset and agile. I don't know if you used the pivot in there, but I feel like the world of consulting that I've been in for so long is really just all about change. So probably since the late 90s, I've been navigating continual change. So that's whether in the space of embracing new roles, new clients, new technology, new processes, new teams, even a new company after we were acquired. So being agile and really embracing that growth mindset, using sort of what Pagely was just sharing, I think is so important. And I would say this is across industries nowadays too. Staying curious. I always dip my toes into many different pools. So whether I'm at work or in one of my community organizations, I'm a joiner. So I jump into different committees. I think, just keep learning, growing, make sure that you just you don't need to be on the bleeding edge, but maybe, just near the cutting edge so that you're not surprised by new things that come across, and you can keep embracing that change as you keep exploring into new spaces. So yeah, just piggyback on Pagely.
Excellent. So what about this, Anisha? We'll stay with you. What types of mentors have you had in your career, and how did they shape the development that you helped others with? How did they shape you becoming a mentor?
I mean, I personally believe that great leaders are also really strong mentors, and I am so grateful to have worked with a number of them. I would say my mentors pulled me up to the table, asked good questions, didn't tell me the answers, and then instead just prodded with more questions. And I've had mentors, whether it was through work, not always a direct manager, but also school professors, and then outside groups like the Vistage group that I belong to. And I feel like the more prepared that I came in, so me being a mentee, the more I learned. So if I came prepared with questions for the mentor, and then of course they kept asking me questions back, I did keep learning more through that process. And I currently have several mentees. I do also ask a lot of questions. We break goals down into smaller milestones. So rather than saying, what is it that you want to accomplish this year? Let's look at this coming month or this quarter and just keep checking in on how are they doing. Is it red, yellow, green? Not using grading. I'm not into that, but just letting them use me as a sounding board. And I'm always going to be their ally and advocate for them behind the scenes. And again, just the key word for me with mentors is all about listening.
Excellent. All right, Pagely. So inclusion and the whole conversation around inclusion is a really important and common focus at most companies today. So what does inclusion look like for women in the environment you're working in today?
Oh, this is such a meaty topic, Jen. And we know that, I just want to acknowledge that inclusion just isn't about gender, but with respect to women. I think an inclusive workplace is really where we see women at the leadership table. So we want to see people like us reflected in, leadership who's actually informing and making some of the key decisions for the company and forming the strategy, setting the culture. So that representation is critical just from an inclusivity in mind. And I think from my own personal experience in marketing, marketing tends to be a very woman-heavy environment, if you will. And so I do see a lot of women being represented and included in this area with like good career progression. But as I think of areas like engineering and software development, I think we have an exceptionally long way to go. I'm not in those areas, so I can't speak to what it's like to be there, but hearing some of the stories, I know that there is a lot to be done there. And, I think the other thing about inclusion is that every company talks about it right now. Every company is saying that they have, a DEI practice, and they have like a chief diversity officer looking across diversity, equity, inclusion. And there's a lot of talk going on. But frankly, I think that more need to walk the talk than just talk the talk. I read this like terrifying statistic in a McKinsey report just recently that said only 1 in 4 C-suite leaders were women. The same report showed that female leaders we're seeing a huge decrease in women leaders in certain companies, and they're leaving these companies because, going back to that culture and philosophy and like how we need to really set up an organization to make it a friendly place for all. They're not seeing the ability for flexible work. There is not a dedication to employee well-being, and there's not, inherently, there's not this embodiment of core DEI principles, which is causing a huge ripple effect now. So I think a company needs to have DEI embedded as part of their culture, and it needs to be part of their DNA in order for this to work. But that's kind of what I'm seeing with inclusion. I think we're making progress. I love that it's on the agenda. I love that we're talking about it. I just want to see it be put into more practice.
Okay, so I'm going to have just a couple more questions, one for each of you, sort of in the category of lessons learned, and then we'll open it up and address some of our Q&A. So what about you, Paisley? We'll stick with you. What's one thing you wish you would have known before you started your career?
There's so many things.
You just get to pick one.
Okay, if there's one, I'm going to go back to boundaries. I think, look, I wish somebody had pulled me aside and said, look, this work thing, it is going to eat you up if you let it. And it will. If you don't set hard rules on when you start and stop, you're going to get sucked in. And I think a lot of people have this misconception that saying no is a weakness, or that they're not going to be recognized, or that they're going to, not be, evaluated for certain positions or projects because they said no. But saying no is a superpower. It's just about what you're saying no to. So I think that saying no does not make you weak. It shows that you are able to highly prioritize. In fact, I would encourage you to think about saying no more to certain things and being very careful about what you say yes to. So, that would be definitely the lesson I wish somebody had coached me on before I started my career.
But would we have listened, right?
I mean, probably not, Anisha, but I would have remembered it and then felt very guilty for not listening later.
It's excellent advice. I recently had an experience where I said no to something, and I was so proud of myself. Even at this phase in this age, I was like, gosh darn it, no, that it crossed a boundary and I wasn't willing to go there. And I couldn't have done that 20 or 30 years ago.
No, and it's empowering to say no, especially when it's the right thing to say no to. So yes.
Yes. All right, Anisha. So our last formal question before the Q&A. What advice would you give to the next generation? And I'm going to say female leaders, but the next generation of leaders.
Yeah, no, it's reaching back. I think, one of the phrases that I've heard out there lately is, send the elevator back down, but really reaching back, supporting other women, bringing them to the table, listening, amplifying their voice. Because I think once we get to a certain point in our careers, we feel comfortable and have the confidence with our voices, but let's bring other voices to the table, embracing being a leader with EQ, and don't wait for perfect. Keep learning and growing. And I think that grace of space, taking a step back, looking at what you're doing and whether it's fulfilling, that's so important.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for the formal part of the Q&A or of the evening together. So now we're going to go into the Q&A. And Caitlin, am I right? You're
Yes.
gonna manage this?
I will facilitate because Jen, we want you to also answer because of your experience as well. And so I'm just looking at a laptop here as the questions have come in, if I'm not looking at the actual camera. So this is a really good question from Brittany. She says, does anyone have any tips for how to have a conversation with a manager that has not set up those important work-life balance boundaries for themselves? She finds herself emulating them, even if it's not expected of her, and she's volunteering for assignments that will require extra hours of work because she sees that her managers are holding a lot of weight. So any tips on how to have those conversations?
Anisha, over to you. I'll follow.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent question because it's really easy to get into a culture of, it's called the hero culture, right? It's the person who stays up all night and then informs everybody that they worked all night on the project or, on the statement of work. And so you start feeling like you all need to do that. And what I would say, just the conversation with the manager is calling it out and being really authentic. Oh, and I'm getting tired of that word. So maybe just being you and as open as possible and saying, you're working at finding your boundaries. Can you help me set these boundaries? So asking for guidance then puts it on them to truly step into a good managerial role and support you. And anytime that you go to them saying, I'd love your help in finding the boundaries in my space, then they'll be thinking more about what they're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think there's a way to approach it depending on your relationship with your manager in a solution-oriented way. Oftentimes the question might arise as to why they're working around the clock like that. Is this a process issue? Is it a prioritization issue? And how might you have that conversation to even shine some light on blind spots that they may have with regards to those two areas? I also think that it's okay, and it should always be okay to say, these are my hours, this is when I work, and setting those boundaries for yourself, even if your leader isn't doing that. So hopefully that's helpful as well.
I echo that. I would often, when I approach a situation like that, I would seek to understand sort of like, here's what I'm observing. I want to make sure that my priorities are right. I have this much time to dedicate to a project. Let's be clear on what those goals are that I need to accomplish. And so having a conversation about, do we have our priorities right? Because sometimes we spend too much time on things because our priorities are not right. But it is the sitting down and having the conversation with your manager. And that's the first step. It's the hardest and it gets easier from there.
Totally.
It's a good question, Brittany.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. And we have a question from an art major who's graduating this spring from the U of O. On the topic of good mentors, do you have any advice on how to find and stay connected to willing mentors?
I have a variety of mentors across my career. Normally, these are people that have either been in leadership positions at companies that I've been at and that I respected because of qualities that they embodied. So I think having more than one mentor is also great because you get a variety of different opinions that way, and you might need, different areas of expertise in different situations. And so for me, I really look at people who inspire me and who lead the way that I continue to aspire to lead. And I ask them directly if they'll mentor me. And I set a rhythm on what that looks like. So for me, it's been quarterly. I come with an agenda. I talk about areas that I want to work on. But I think first and foremost, it's identifying who you feel like you could really learn from. And that doesn't necessarily have to be even within, your area that you're diving into. Like if you're an art major and want to go into the art world, it could still be somebody that's in corporate America that could be an excellent mentor for you. It depends on what you want to get out of the mentorship. But I think then the mentorship is in your control, and you have to really help navigate what that looks like.
And I would add on, one of the things that I would do is think about almost like a board of directors around me, as people that knew me, Jen, as a person, and then others that knew me, my skill set, like the technical things that I did. But with each of them, I would ask, and then I would also set expectations so it wasn't overwhelming. Like, I would like your help for the next 6 months, and I'd like to meet every 6 weeks. And I'll bring the questions and challenges I'm facing so that it didn't seem overwhelming to them in terms of what I might be pulling on them for.
Yeah, and I think that also some of it happens naturally. If you belong to, I don't know, an outside group, even if it's like your book club. For me, it's, a Vistage group or a Commission on Status of Women. You'll start finding that you're going to particular people, and you anyways are crossing paths with them. And so it's having that quick chat with them before or after, and then asking, is it okay if I follow up with you after I've tried this or done this? And I feel like there's some of that natural mentoring that happens. And then also with others, I just have a standing recurring meeting, and others, it's just at the end of one meeting saying, you know what, in 2 months, is it okay if we touch base on this again? So I think lots of different ways of crossing paths, and also leaning on others who may have gone a similar route before you.
Great, thank you all. So kind of a shorter question, but probably equally important to those, is any tips on how to negotiate an offer? Using all those skills you've mentioned.
Okay. Never share what you're making. Like, you're always going to want to go up. Ask for what you deserve. Like, I think that's the most important thing, because companies are ultimately going to negotiate down always and forever. They're going to try and find like the best mix. So if you go in low, or if you say, well, I'm making exactly this, they're going to come in low too, and it's not going to be what you want. So, I think in terms of like the financial part of it, I would say, make sure that you're asking for exactly what you want and what you deserve. And don't be afraid if that is going to turn them off, because if it's turning them off, that's also telling you something about that organization, by the way. If they value you enough, they're going to try and have a conversation with you about it. I think if it's an up-leveling of a role, always know your worth. Go in knowing exactly what you're worth, and don't be afraid of saying that. It kind of goes back to this advocacy for self, which I think in interviews is so incredibly important, to be able to state, this is what I've done, this is what I can do, and I actually think I deserve a higher title here. Are you willing to go up on that? I've had so many of those conversations in my career, and honestly, they end up being mostly positive. So you have to put yourself out there and take that risk, but I highball and I ask for exactly what I want.
Yeah. And be informed. There's so many sites out there now that you can really educate yourself on what that role, what the value is in that role. So, that could be a salary range, but the information is there, and make sure you inform yourself and get that information, talk to people. So don't go in and wait for them to give you an offer, because as Paisley said, the company really is looking out for themselves, and they're not going to go higher. So it's you that goes higher, and make sure that you are asking for what you deserve, and then at least have that information and those stats and those numbers in your back pocket.
Great. And Jen, there's actually a question specifically here for you, kind of related to that, I think. Well, maybe. Being a woman in finance, when it comes to inclusivity, what was your experience like being in the C-suite?
it was an excellent learning experience. So I had to find my voice, right? I was often the only woman around the huge boardroom table, and I was in healthcare and a lot of male physicians. I had to just make sure that I didn't let myself get in my way. I had to teach myself that I had really good ideas. I knew how to solve problems, and no one would know that unless I spoke up. So I had to just find a way to always say, contribute, and push for what I felt was the right answer. And sometimes, and Anisha, you mentioned it, I couldn't wait for perfection. I couldn't wait to be an expert in a lot of the stuff that I had to face. I had to go with some instinct and apply some prior similar, but not exact experiences, because I needed to be comfortable being a little bit uncomfortable with what I was doing, and not let that intimidate me. Because everyone else around the table thought they were brilliant often, and they weren't always. So I had to make sure that I held my ground.
I love that, Jen. I wish I could be a fly on the wall.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So someone asked, what are some of your key philosophies, mantras, words of wisdom that you rely on to keep you grounded through changes in life to maintain a positive and confident outlook?
Mine, it's not elegant at all, and I probably shouldn't even say where it comes from.
Safe.
It's a safe space, right? It feels safe because I can only see a few people on Zoom. So mine is tenacious. You have no idea. So that's like what I say. And I believe it comes from the first Jurassic Park. And there were the two scientists, and the one, I think, was the husband, and one was the wife, and they were on the island, and she was digging through this huge pile of manure, animal manure, to find something. And one of the other scientists was talking to the husband and said something about the wife. And he's like, tenacious, you have no idea. It's like, I will dig in, I will go into the deepest pile to figure it out. Like, I'm tough. Don't mess with me. So my mantra is convincing myself that I'm tough.
Ooh,
And
that's such a good one.
I don't know if we can compete with the digging through poop.
Say that, but it's true.
That is
Other than picking up my dog poop, right?
I have so many different mantras. I think depending on sort of what's happening in life, there's a quote that I love to live by. It's Maya Angelou, and I'm not going to, of course, I'm going to totally ruin it right now, but I think it's something to the effect that others might not remember what they do, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And I like to live that way because I think that means that you're really kind of living with the spirit of kindness, with grace, and taking the high road where possible. So it goes back to my philosophy of trying to make others great, or at least trying to replicate that as much as possible. But I do like the poop one, and I feel like I'm going to take that on now too.
I know, Jen, that was so awesome for you to go first. And, I was thinking, because like Paisley, there's different ones that cross my mind in different situations. And one that always just keeps coming forward is just gratitude, whether it's, writing in the gratitude journal at night, and, trying to make sure that it's not the same thing every night, like, so glad the dog went poop or whatever it is, but that you have different things. We'll just keep bringing it around to that, Jen.
Yeah.
But I think, gratitude to me is so huge, just to fall asleep with that in mind. And then, the curiosity, that's something that is just constantly in my brain, because it's like things will catch my attention. I want to learn more. So I'll put my pinky in or put one finger in, and all of a sudden my whole arm is like yanked in, and I'm leading the group. But at the same time, I think that's what I love. It's just that always evolving. And that was one of our old taglines in Primitive Logic. And I just love that, always evolving, just growing, changing, and, being grateful for the space that we're in.
I think I'm going to totally plus one on that. I think there's this notion of the beginner's mindset where you need to approach things new. You need to always be open to new experiences and kind of approach with that, undying curiosity that is so important. So I love that, Anisha. That's a really good one.
Okay, great. I think we're getting down to some of the, maybe the last question. And it's from Judah, who I think had to leave, unfortunately, but this will be recorded. I think that was one of the questions that was also asked. And yes, this is being recorded and will be on the, I believe, Alumni Association website, but I will confirm that momentarily. But the last question is, going back to resiliency, was there ever a point when the demands of a job made you think that you may have to address it, saying, no, this is not working for me? And if so, how did you make that decision?
I had that happen in my career. I was at one company, and I think there's a couple of things for me that matter immensely. It's, sort of culture and values of that company. And if they're aligned to my values, so do we have shared values together? And then do they respect my voice? And if that voice is saying, I need time, or I can't do this, and using those no statements. And if that's ignored and there's continued pressure to push and push and push, that will break somebody. And so versus breaking, I left, because what I realized was that there was a complete lack of cultural alignment between myself and that org. And I think those are moments that it's probably best to walk away, because you're not going to change the organization, but you can change the path that you take. So that's one of my examples.
I like that. That's a great example.
Thank you.
Jen, any that come to your mind?
No, not probably times I should have, but no, it's probably that tenacious thing. I probably stuck in some things that I should have walked away from.
Well, and I was thinking as Paisley was talking that often if I'm in a situation that I don't agree with, or there's something in the job that I don't like, I've always managed to change it. Like, I didn't stay in any situation that didn't feel right to me. So I either, maybe it's that consulting hat that you put on, you keep dropping some crumbs to lead people in the correct direction that you want them to go into. So I don't know if I certainly would have left, like Paisley said, if it was something that wasn't changing, but I tried to always bring about positive change and, really keep ensuring that, the company or the group or the team or whoever just kept changing and moving in that direction that made sense to me. And, obviously would step away from it if it didn't feel right.
Yeah, I think if I couldn't evoke the change that was needed to make it feel right and align with my ethics, I absolutely would step away. I think I might have just been in situations where I was able to have enough influence, at least to my comfort level, that I could make a change. But
yeah,
I always wanted to have choices, always through my career. I always had a lineup of, I could go do these 5 things tomorrow. So don't push me, because I will. So I always wanted to have options and keep those wide open.
That's actually really great recommendation for people listening. Just have those plan A, B, C.
Oh yeah, always take the interview too.
Yeah.
Okay, so one final question for real. know from Pagely specifically, does the OKR strategy for wellnomics and sleep time tracking, or maybe what are those? How do you handle the digital noise and too much information surrounding your work environment?
Oh, it's such a great question. So yes, I do sleep time tracking. I have an Aura ring, so that's another part of my OKR that I did not share. I look at my Aura ring for activity tracking and try and make sure that I stay accountable to that. Most of the time, I'm not doing a great job, but it's there as a reminder. I think that the digital noise is tough, right? Like it's not just from work, it's from everywhere. It's from all social media. And when I was talking about shutting down, I mean, I shut down my digital devices, and I need that break because otherwise it's going to constantly overwhelm and hit me. And that's not going to be sustainable, nor do I feel like that's healthy. So I do not keep my phone in my bedroom. I keep it outside. I make sure that my place of rest is completely digital free. And I think it's really just about using tech where it can benefit you. And then again, setting that boundary where it becomes too invasive. So hopefully that's helpful, Sam. I'm not sure wellnomics, but I will look into that because that sounds fascinating.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank everyone who asked a question. And I know some people probably dropped off, but thank you for all that are still here. I also want to thank the Duck Career Network for partnering on this event through the Alumni Association. And in the chat will be, their link has been dropped, but maybe another one specific to future events they have upcoming that are similar to this, different themes. Please sign up and attend. As we learned tonight, there's so much to learn from fellow alumni. And really huge thank you to this on your screen right now, Pagely, Anisha, and Jen. I feel like rejuvenated, and maybe my boss might be watching, and watch out. I'm ready now. I feel very prepared to have some conversations now. And yeah, thank you all, and just have a great evening. Go Ducks.
Go Ducks.